My friends, it is now Wednesday morning, November 7th, the day after the U.S. presidential election. I had written an article the day before the presidential election stating that if the candidate who was pro-life, pro-traditional family, and pro-religious freedom was elected, that I believed that there would be a window of God's mercy that would shine upon the United States of America. But that if indeed the candidate who was pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage, and anti-religious freedom was elected, that it would initiate a period of justice, God's justice for America. Now, we know the choice that the United States has made. And in many ways, people are doing various analyses of, was it a tactical problem? Was it an advertising problem? And I think all of those fall short of the deeper issue. It was a problem of faith, that the United States is losing its faith in God, that the national soul of the United States is not only no longer Christian, but it's no longer a faith in a country that reflects the revelation of God and the natural law which God has written in every human heart. So I do believe that we will initiate now a series of challenges, difficulties, and even chastisements for the United States that God will allow to take place for the sake of our purification. And I think it would be tragic if when these things take place, and I believe they would take place in succession in the not too distant future, elements of natural disasters, potential acts of terrorism, and the continued moral degeneration of our country, that it would be a tragic error to say, where is God when this takes place? Why would God allow this to happen to our country? Because, my friends, God has to respect His greatest gift to each one of us, which is our free will. And when we choose a candidate whose policies do not reflect God's revelation, God's understanding of the sanctity of human life from conception till death, God's covenant of marriage, which He has blessed so abundantly, and He has identified the absence of that in terms of a homosexual relationship as something that is not pleasing to His heart, and the absence of religious freedom, a policy that would prevent us from giving due worship to God. When we vote for a policy and a person that holds these positions, we then have to experience the consequences of our choice, that we have chosen against God in these ways, and God therefore must respond in justice, which is still a virtue. Now, I would say to Christians who have a real understanding of what it means to have a administration that has these godless policies, the ones that I just mentioned, for those who understand what this will mean, I think there's great mourning. I think there's also even the temptation to ask, why would God permit this? And once again, the answer is the same. We have to look at ourselves as a nation. We have to look at our conscience as a country and say, when we choose against God, we can't expect God to then save us from the effects of our own free will. But at the same time, I'm going to say emphatically, the Christian American must now, like never before, become a sign of hope and peace and even joy. Yes, joy. When I say joy, I don't mean in a superficial, artificial way by which there's something on the outside that's not really present on the inside, some type of emotional disposition. I mean that we, like more than ever, as Christian Americans, must reflect the joy that only comes from Jesus Christ and His dwelling in our souls. It is time like never before, as Philippians 2:12 says, to be children of God, showing light in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. We have to be expressions and manifestations and witnesses that when things get dark and darker for our country, we reflect the light that does not come from politics. Ultimately, my friends, peace does not come from politics. Peace comes from the presence of Jesus Christ in the soul. And that is why every Christian, apart from feelings of difficulty and trial and mourning over the election of a policy which is so against the revelation of God, Christians must dig deep and become greater signs of the peace, of the hope, and the joy of Jesus Christ for our nation. Now, the darker it gets, the more we need to be children of God manifesting His light. How do we do that? Well, for the general Christian, we're called to greater prayer of the heart. Because as we pray, at times of quiet, at times when we have a closed door and closed to all the technological media of today, and we're asking Jesus to fill our hearts with the peace we cannot produce on our own, He will respond generously. And so for Christians, we must become people of more prayer, more consistent prayer, and more interior prayer, so that Jesus can give us that peace and joy, and then we can go out and be witnesses to that peace and joy. The darker it gets, the more it is our responsibility to bring forward this light. For Catholic Christians, we are called in a special way to greater adoration of Jesus in the Eucharist. For not only Sunday Mass, but more weekday Masses by which we can receive the Prince of Peace in the Eucharist. The prayer of the Rosary, where Mary as Queen of Peace can bring peace to our hearts, and also a manner of peace in how we conduct ourselves in the public forum. But ultimately, we are going to have to become people of greater prayer, because it's going to be more difficult. Christians are going to become more signs of contradiction in our country than ever before in its history. And we can do this. And we must do this. It is a call of Jesus to each Christian American to become more a sign of peace and joy and light for our country the darker it gets. But we're going to have to pray more. And we're going to have more interior prayer, where in the tabernacle of our hearts, where God speaks to us, that Jesus will be more present, more generous, more an instrument of the peace that we then will convey. And let me give you this image. If there are 10 people in a public line, and 9 of those 10 people begin to show on their faces and in their bodies the weight, the pains of greater and greater financial burdens, of more family breakdown, of more problems with relationships and issues of what it means to be a citizen, but also a person in society in the United States. That as we see this peacelessness, this hopelessness, this joylessness, we are going to have to be, as Christian Americans, that 10th person who shows with the smile on our lips, with the peace in our eyes, with the gestures and actions of understanding and empathy, that there is a remedy, that we can make it through this, that there is hope. They have to see Jesus in our eyes and in our smile so that they can then ask, how do I get what you have? And then we become evangelizers of light in a nation that is dark and growing darker based on its choices. So in general, Christian America, we are called to be people of hope and light and peace. We don't have time to mourn the loss of our country. We have to light up our country with the peace that comes from Jesus Christ. And I say once again to Catholic Christians, go before the Blessed Sacrament for a bathing of peace and light. Go to Jesus, who's truly present, and ask Him to fill in your heart what is lacking in terms of the peace and the joy and the hope that we should have as Catholic Christians. My friends, there is every reason to know that Jesus will be the victor in our country, and in fact that we are called in a critical way to assist Him at this time for our country's benefit. Because ultimately, Christian Americans are people of great national pride, but it's because we have a heavenly home that ultimately we will go to. Let's make sure we become greater instruments of prayer and peace and joy for our country. Light in darkness. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle saying thank you and God bless.